Well, this last weekend was the Leona Divide 100-mile endurance run through the Leona Divide, which is in the Angeles National Forest, up near the San Gabriel Mountains, and it was a really good race. We went up there the day before, checked out the start-finish line area, checked in, and then also drove to a couple of the aid station stops so that Alicia and her mom would know where to go to as they're crewing me, and hopefully not get lost in the process, and hopefully minimize the stress that they had on themselves. And we stayed at Airbnb in Palmdale, and that was about 25 minutes from the start line, so it made the next day much easier as we started at 5:30 a.m. And instead of it being in the 40s, which is what the weather forecasted to be, it was in the low 30s. So started off very cold, although it felt nice once we got going. It just took a few minutes to warm up, and just so had a really good race, and we'll get into some of those details. So, as you know, if you've been watching my other videos, I did a lot of testing of my salt nutrition intake throughout my training to figure out what best suited me. And I did find, a good salt and carbohydrate ratio that helped fuel me and keep me hydrated throughout my training. However, there was one caveat to that. So, with increased salt, you have increased water retention. With increased water retention, at least in my case, I decreased sweating. Now, I am a very heavy sweater. I'm used to being pretty drenched when I run. And what happens with that is you get your own topical cooling. Now, cooling is important when you're racing because you don't want to overheat and you want to feel comfortable. So in my other races, I didn't have my salt increased to where I had it on this race, and I ended up sweating a bit more, which kept me pretty comfortable in the hotter temperatures. Now, the temperature capped out around mid-70s at the Leona Divide, and I felt hot and I was dry because I wasn't sweating with 1,000 to 1,400 milligrams of sodium per hour intake. Late in the race, probably about halfway through the race, I started to decrease my salt intake, and that did increase my sweating a little bit, but then this was getting into the night when it wasn't necessarily harder to stay cool because the temperatures were dropping. So that is something that I would definitely consider moving forward, but unfortunately that does mean that I will, and I usually am a frequent peer when I run. I'll go at least once per hour, and if I'm decreasing my salt, sometimes it's even sooner than that, just depending on how much fluid I am taking in, because I do like to consume fluids while I'm running, especially when it's hot. So it's just something I got to play with. So one of my tactics while running these longer distance races has been implementing a heart rate cap on my watch. So to start, I will want my heart to be lower, below 150 beats per minute for the first 5 or 6 hours. And then after that, allow that cap to slowly creep up, because as the distance and time increases, the like the effort to stay at those similar paces is going to increase a little bit. So giving yourself a little bit of a leeway to stay at around the same effort level, even though your heart rate is going to be a little bit higher. So I did that throughout the race. Unfortunately, my chest strap heart rate monitor, which is much more accurate, wasn't wanting to connect to my watch, and so I was going based off of my heart, or based off of my watch for a little bit. Knowing that that's not very accurate, I switched to going off mostly RPE, rated perceived exertion. And I felt like that went really well, especially later in the race. You know, when I was getting to climbs and wanting to still run some, I would run for a period of time and then allow myself to walk and then let that RP come back down, run again. So, of course, in the beginning, I had, well, 2 days before the race, I was at Fleet Feet in Laguna Niguel, and I was talking to one of the guys there. I think his name's Brock, and he was telling me, if you see this young kid named Derek, let him know I said he's a punk. And he told me that his dad was in the race too, and I had just seen a post or something, and I recognized his dad from running in the area, and so I saw him, met him, ran with him for a little bit, which got my heart rate up a little bit too high at the beginning. So I wasn't perfect on my heart rate plan from the start, but I did get it under control and managed that well into the race. And I think overall it went really well as far as helping me to execute my plan later on. All right, so how did performance go for the 100 mile? So I already spoke about you know, my strategy with my heart rate, RPE, and how that worked out really well towards the end. Early on in the race, however, my hip really started to bug me, my left hip. I was getting a pressure point like right in the middle of my left glute, and it was making it very uncomfortable. And the only thing I think about is, how am I going to go another 80 miles with this hip issue? Is it going to get worse? And honestly, I almost dropped down to the 100K. So I didn't want to not finish the race, but I wasn't sure if I could go the full distance. So at the Bouquet Canyon aid station, which was around mile 24, I was supposed to be there at 10:32. I got there about 10:18, so about 14 minutes early. And I used that whole 14 minutes to, you know, slowly refill my bags, eat, text Alicia, and really figure out if I was going to continue on. Because at Bouquet Canyon, this was the last stop before Agua Dulce, and Agua Dulce was not part of the 100K course. So if you went on to Agua Dulce, you could not switch the 100K course. You had to make a decision at Bouquet Canyon. So I was a little defeated, felt pretty down, and in the end I said, no, I didn't come here to do 100K, came here to do 100 miles. My family's counting on me to be at Agua Dulce around 12:30, 1 o'clock, and I need to get there and do the best I can, see them, and recuperate. So a big thing, or I guess something I hear a lot in the ultra running community, is everything doesn't always get worse, or it doesn't always get worse. And that is so true, because by the time I got to Agua Dulce, hip didn't bother me again. I was also dealing with a lot of hot spots on my feet, and I made a bunch of blister kits, which I'll go over into exact detail what I had in there and how I used it. But I used those 4 or 5 times, and when I felt the hot spots coming in, same thing. I was thinking, it's too early for these to start happening. How's this gonna feel, 20, 30 miles? Are my feet gonna get absolutely torn up? So I was really worried about that. Used the blister kit, feet felt great. Each of those spots stopped bothering me, didn't even turn into full blisters. So that was really good. And then another big strategy I used, we went to this one aid station, Spunky Edison, 3 times. On the second go, we had a 7-mile out to the next aid station and 7 miles back, so 14 miles till we were back at that aid station again. I think you climbed about 2.5 miles, and then it was a long, gradual descent all the way into, I forget, I think that was Lincoln Crest aid station. So, got into Lincoln Crest, and way before I got there, I was thinking, this is going to be such a long hike to get back up to the top of this 5-mile, what was for me at that point a gradual descent was going to be a gradual climb on the way back. And then I remember what my friend and my Eric taught me, which is 4 1s. Run 4 minutes, walk 1 minute. And I saw so many people just slow hiking up this gradual climb. So I turned the timer on my watch. It has a run walk setting. I set the timer for 4 minutes to run, 1 minute to walk. And then I passed 4 people on that segment. So huge success. I honestly wish I tried to use it later on, although I have come a long way in my climbing, and I feel like I'm becoming a very good climber. The durability that I have in climbing is not quite there yet. So when I got to, mile 82, I think, before we turned around to go back up another gradual climb, which is a little bit steeper, I just didn't have it in me. Plus, it was like 3 a.m. So, all in all, performance went really good. Something that I wasn't able to do because of the training races that I had implemented in this last block was I didn't specify on climbing as much, which means I also didn't specify in descending as much. And so, had I spent more time on the trail, climbing, descending, on just different terrain, I think I would have been in a much better place to do even better than I did, even though I did do really well. I'm really happy with how I did in this race. All right, so what did I do for my fueling and hydration strategy? So between every aid station, I would fill up 2 20-ounce soft flasks with 1 packet of Tailwind and half a packet of Element electrolytes in each. So each bottle had about 200 calories, 1,100 milligrams of sodium, and I'd also take in 1 gel every 30 minutes. So that would be another 24 grams of carbohydrates and another 100 or so milligrams of sodium. And each aid station was around 1.5 hours to 2 hours apart. So wouldn't be finishing every bottle by the time I got there, but both the bottles would be about 3/4 of the way done. And the goal is just to refill every time, same mixture, and keep going. I did that for about 7 hours, and then I started to dilute it a little bit more, having 1 bottle of just water, and still staying on the gels till probably about hour 18, and then eating stuff at the aid stations. Mile 32, I had a Jersey Mike's sandwich, some chips, and then at the aid stations, I just, whatever looked good, that's what I would eat. will say the gels got really old by 18 hours in. That would have been, what, 36 gels? I don't think I got all 36 in, but still, it was a lot of gels, to the point where it wasn't making me nauseous sick, but the thought of taking another one made me want to throw up. So towards the end, switched to one bottle with the Tailwind and the Element, and one bottle of water, and no more gels, just eating a little bit extra at the aid stations. As far as what I ran in during the race, I started out in the Topo Vistas, these guys, for the first 50K. So I saw my crew at mile 32.5 and switched out from the Topo Vistas into the Keen Seeks. One reason why I switched out somewhat early, I was getting hot spots on my feet, which were kind of turning into blisters. Thankfully, I addressed them early so they didn't turn into blisters. But I also was starting to get hot spots in the Keens. But I did 32.5 in the Vistas, and then to mile 94 in the Keens. So 62 miles in the Keens. And then the last 7 miles, I switched into the Ultra Forward Vias. These are my recovery day road shoes. The reason why I like switching into road shoes on trail races, well, one, this was an out and back course, so I knew the terrain I was going to be on, it wasn't going to be too technical. And so that gave me comfort in switching to something without, any sort of real aggressive traction. And two, they're a little bit lighter because of the sole. So that'll, reduce somewhat minimally, but it'll still reduce the load that you're putting on your feet every time you pick up your foot. An ounce is an ounce. And that over 2 hours, or however long, it took me about 2 hours to get to the finish line, adds up every step. I mean, my cadence is around 150 to 200 steps per minute, so multiply that out, 150 times a minute, 150 ounces a minute, multiply that into the hours, and that's ends up being a lot of weight that you're not lifting. Also, just a different feel to the foot, kind of changes the pressure points of those of the shoes on your feet, which then it gets a little more comfortable. So your feet are getting tired of being in one shoe, switch to a different shoe with a slightly different arch form or what have you, and you're able to finish that race out much stronger that way. So the final thing I want to get into is the blister kits. Obviously, I used them many times if you watched my race video, and I'm super glad that I put these together. So inside each blister kit, I had an assortment of these Compeed bandages. This is the package that they come in, and there's different sizes, and within them, kind of show you what they look like here. They're these little rubbery bandages, basically. And so that almost fuses to your foot in a way, and it makes it, it takes away the friction point. And then, so I would alcohol wipe my foot, so I had lots of alcohol wipes. And I'd put this on, and then I would put on, KT Tape has their Leuco tape, which for blisters, and they're much smaller than the regular ones. So if I can grab it here. Come in these little strips. I'd put that over the Compeed bandage, and then I'd be solid for the rest of the race. So I had one that I put on at mile 11, didn't have to change it once. Had another that I put on around mile 25, again, didn't have to change it. And then a couple more that got added later to different points that were just starting to get bothered. So that was super easy. Again, the other things I had were the alcohol wipes, and then I had a blade just in case I needed to lance any of the blisters and drain them, and thankfully I didn't have to do that. But that came in a lot of help. I don't know what my feet would have looked like had I not had them, but I'm glad that I did. So really easy. In each of my backpacks, I had one where I just had, a handful of each thing separated. And then my pack had this main kit with the actual cases and stuff. So the pack ones were super light, super minimal, just enough to get me through the aid station where I'd see my crew if I didn't see my crew at that aid station. And I'll definitely be carrying those with me from here on out, because if you address those blisters early, they're not going to become a problem.